Welcome to Reasoned UK. Please do hit that subscribe button and the notification bell if you enjoy today's show. Now, I'm absolutely certain that you will, because we've got quite the topic today. And I just want to show you this barrage of rockets. I think that's the only justifiable adjective to use there, being propelled by Hamas into Israel, which is in control of the Gaza Strip. Now, Israel fortunately has this Iron Dome technology, which you can see working here. That's nothing short, I think it has to be said, of a military miracle, if you will. And you can see in this footage how it shoots these projectiles that could see an end to hundreds, I don't know, maybe even thousands of lives. And who knows just how much destruction could be caused were they to actually enter Israel. Now, joining me to discuss what's actually happening in Israel, why it's happening, and what's going on in general is Joseph Cohen of the Israel Advocacy Movement. Now, Joseph, this all made for, I think it's safe to say, a very dramatic and shocking end to Jerusalem Day, didn't it? Watching that, and I said to you before we went on air, I was shocked at that footage. And, you know, watching that from a position of, I use that word not in the social justice sense, but a position of privilege. I feel safe here, right? I feel secure here. I can't imagine what it must feel like for the people of Israel facing threats like this, in which you live under constant fear that just one of these rockets won't be caught by that impressive military technology, and then that'll be the end of you and your family. What's it like on the ground for people in Israel? You've got family there, right?
Yeah, I've got family, and it's terrifying. So my family, my closest family there, they've got young children. We've got one that has a 1-year-old child. They've been hiding in bomb shelters. Their parents are hiding in bomb shelters. It's words can't explain the fear of watching these videos. That video was actually one of the milder videos. Hamas, in their act of aggression, have fired 1,000 rockets, over 1,000 rockets now, at Israel. And the Iron Dome is incredible. It's caught 90% of them, but it can't catch them all. And there's horrific videos coming out of Israel of the devastation that these rockets are causing. So far, 5 Israelis have been killed, 2 of them Israeli Arabs. Hamas fire at civilians indiscriminately. They don't care if they kill Jews, Arabs, as long as they're hitting Israel. And so we've had 2 Israeli Arabs, 1 Indian woman was killed. We've had a number of Jewish women who've been killed. It's harrowing. And so one of the things that the footage doesn't capture is what happens when those rockets get through. And the other thing to really emphasize is the Iron Dome is very good at saving the lives of Israel citizens. But there have been tragedies on the Gaza side. A large percentage of Hamas's rockets fall short of Israel and actually land in Gaza, killing a number of children. And so the video you showed is shocking, but it doesn't do justice to the devastation that these rockets are causing Israel at the moment.
Some have argued that actually Israel's, what they would describe as provocations, I guess, on Jerusalem Day and before it, have actually led to the first... led to this, basically, what this could escalate into, which the United Nations have described, their envoy has described as a possible full-scale war, as well as there's been a long-running legal battle that's been fought between Jewish settlers and Palestinian residents, and the decision of that, correct me if I'm wrong, has been delayed because of the latest violence. Do you think that the state of Israel, the Israeli military, do you think anyone is sort of guilty of actually stirring up this latest set of violence?
So we have to actually look at the chronology. The violence didn't start on Jerusalem Day, Yom Yerushalayim. The violence actually started at the beginning of Ramadan, where most Israeli Arabs and Jews coexist and have a very nice relation. But a trend among some Palestinian youth and Arab youth took off, where they would attack Jews on video and then upload them to TikTok for video fame. That then kind of got out of hand, and the violence steadily escalated, and you had clashes on the streets of Jerusalem between Arab youths who were attacking Jews and then Jews defending themselves and fighting back. And that eventually spilled over to the Temple Mount, or the Al-Aqsa complex. And Yom Yerushalayim summed up the conflict perfectly. Jews were down below at the Western Wall praying, which is beneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And above, you had Palestinian rioters throwing rocks and fireworks down on the Jews who were praying. Obviously, the police had to contain the situation. The rioters almost burnt down Al-Aqsa. Now, that site is the holiest site for Jews in the world, one of the holiest sites for Christians and Muslims, and rioters nearly set it on fire trying to attack Jews. And so Israel had to respond to these acts of aggression. And these acts of aggression are orchestrated. They're not happening in a vacuum. If you look at the pictures and the video footage coming out of these riots on the Al-Aqsa complex, in the Al-Aqsa complex, as we'd call it, the Temple Mount, you'll see a sea of Hamas flags. The Hamas are behind this. It's a planned aggression, and Hamas are gave ultimatums for Israeli police to leave the rioters. They said that if you don't leave the riots and get off the Temple Mount, which is the holiest site for Jews in the world, we are going to rain down rockets on Tel Aviv. We're going to rain rockets across Israel if you don't leave by 6 o'clock. And they lived up to their word. They attacked Israel for no reason. Israel didn't provoke anything. We're literally, the footage we're seeing of Jews are Jews praying on Jerusalem Day. And just to add a little extra level to that, to show to the lengths that the Israeli government was going to de-escalate the conflict, every Jerusalem Day, Jews ascend to the Temple Mount, to the Al-Aqsa complex, because it's the most holy site for the Jewish people, and we pray there. This year, Jews were not allowed to pray at their holiest site. In contrast, 80,000 Muslims prayed there on the last Friday of Ramadan. So Jews are banned from praying at our holiest site because it will cause, it's seen as a provocation, yet Muslims can pray at our holy site, and Jews are fine with that. It's this huge double standard that usually whatever Israel is being accused of, the inverse is quite often true. Israel did not storm the Al-Aqsa complex. The Israel defended its people, both Jews and Arabs, from aggression that's orchestrated by Hamas.
Could you just explain what Hamas is for some at home who might not know?
Okay, so sorry. So if I step back,
that's all right.
So Hamas is a militant organization, a terrorist organization that were formed out of a Islamist organization called the Muslim Brotherhood. Their objective is to destroy the state of Israel. Their defining charter says it's a religious obligation for Muslims to slaughter Jews, not Israelis, Muslims to slaughter Jews. They are a genocidal terrorist that based in the Gaza Strip. They oppress the Palestinian people. They want to commit a genocide against the Jewish people. They drove out any political competition in the form of Fatah from the Gaza Strip. They are the Gazan equivalent of ISIS. They share the same ideology.
And, well, I guess then that leads me on to what it's actually, we sort of touched on it. But when I went to Israel, I was really struck by the fact that you've got people, especially in the age of coronavirus, you've got people sort of making, I guess, working from home offices out of their blast door rooms, right? These rooms which are there with steel plates in people's homes to protect them when the sirens start going off and there's a bomb threat that could land on your house. You just don't know. You've just got to protect yourself and get yourself into these rooms that are built in Israeli homes. Just how ingrained in the lives of everyday Israelis is the threat of death, essentially, of imminent death?
So the threat is very, very real. And to really, so first and foremost, you don't always have time to make it to a bomb shelter. Not everybody has a bomb shelter. If you're living in the south, you have 15 seconds. And the time it took for me to finish this sentence, pretty much I've had to make it to my bomb shelter before I risk death. So many of the Israeli casualties are elderly women, elderly men who are unable to make it to a bomb shelter in time. Similarly, if you're driving on the roads, you can't make it to your bomb shelter. So Israelis live in constant fear of attack, constant fear of the bomb sirens going off and having to seek shelter. But I will add, we are a people that have faced trauma throughout every generation for the last 2,000 years. But for the first time in our history, we have the means to defend ourselves. Since we were exiled from Israel, this is the first 2,000 years ago. This is the first time we have the ability to defend ourselves and not rely on others to come to our rescue. And so, as vulnerable as we feel to aggression, which is very real, we're surrounded by people that want to see us wiped from the face of the earth. We're very confident in our ability to defend ourselves and resist the tyrants that seek to destroy us. And so, yeah, Israelis live in fear of attack, but for the first time we have hope that we have the means to defend ourselves from that aggression.
But I guess then the response would come from some watching this video that, well, what chance do you give to those who are actually perhaps living in the Gaza Strip? And I mean, the other side of that argument, which I would offer, would be, you know, if only Hamas would spend as much money as they clearly are on these rockets, launching these missiles, projecting these missiles. They're not cheap. They ain't cheap. Well, how much could be spent on actually making lives better for those that are living in Gaza and elsewhere? It just strikes me as a completely inconsistent argument. But I want to put that question to you, which is, I guess, what chance do you think those actually living there do stand at this moment? And does Israel have a sort of responsibility, a duty of care even?
So let's explore a few things. So there's a few things we have to unpack there. So first and foremost, it's the situation in Gaza for Palestinians, for Arabs who are living under Hamas, is bleak. There's no if, buts, or maybe. But Hamas and in the West Bank, the PLO, Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, are responsible for the Palestinian people. 5% or 3% of their national budget goes on paying the salaries of jailed terrorists. 5% of Israelis' budget goes on research for how we can make the world a better place. The Palestinian leadership consistently takes billions of dollars from the international community and funnels it into complex terror tunnels and underground structures from which they can launch attacks on Israel. They pay huge sums of money on the salaries of terrorists that killed you. The more Jews you kill, the higher the salary you get and your family gets while you're in jail. And so we're looking at a leadership which have consistently chosen war and death and suffering for the Palestinian people over peace and prosperity for them. Had in 1948 the Palestinian leadership accepted the partition plan, we would have a Palestinian state alongside an Israeli state. We would have peace in the region. Hopefully we'd have a thriving economy for the Palestinian people. If in 2008, then when Olmert offered them all of their demands, everything they wanted, a Palestinian state in the West Bank with East Jerusalem as their capital and a shared holy sites in the old city and the Gaza Strip, literally every demand that they wanted, they said no. At every opportunity for peace, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority have betrayed their people and chosen war and destruction. And it's a conflict they will not win and cannot win. And the true losers in this conflict are the Palestinian people who are living under this tyrannical oppression.
And there are fears now, aren't there, that actually the sheer volume of rockets that we're seeing, and as you say, I don't think that footage that I showed at the start actually gives you the full picture, but the sheer volume being launched mean that actually Israeli defences and that sort of military miracle that we spoke of earlier will be completely overwhelmed if it actually continues like this. Is that a fear that you have too? And actually, I guess, do you have any confidence whatsoever that were that to happen, you'd have the backing of the international community behind Israel?
So Israel doesn't have the backing of the international community. Mm-hmm. It is the most condemned country in the United Nations. It's had more resolutions issued against it than any other country in the world. And to put that into context, in 2020, last year, 100 Israelis and Palestinians were killed. Most of those killed, like in this latest wave of violence, were actually carrying out terror attacks against Israel. So there are Palestinians carrying out terror attacks against Israel. 100 people killed. In Yemen, tens of thousands. In Afghanistan, tens of thousands. In Syria, tens of thousands. Virtually no UN resolutions written about any other nation except Israel. Israel is singled out repeatedly for condemnation by the international community. And so, no, I don't have much hope in the international community seeing this conflict impartially. I don't see the I think the media plays a huge part in it. The media's portrayal of Israel, the media's obsession and focus on Israel polarizes and inflames the situation further. So yeah, I don't expect the media to cover this fairly. I don't expect the international community to handle this fairly, because all nations have geopolitical interests. And there's very little that Israel can offer the world other than services and technology. Whereas its surrounding states have oil, there are numerous states who are allied against the state of Israel, and it's in other nations' interests to side with these other nations because they have more to offer. So yeah, Israel is repeatedly singled out in the international community and very rarely gets a fair hearing.
If we think about domestic politics in Israel, Israel's had 4 elections in 2 years in March, I guess it was in March, 2 years. Yeah, 4 elections in 2 years up to March. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, was seen as being on the way out right now, because actually many have argued that he's a bit of a lame duck at the moment. Do you think actually this means Israel is headed for another election, and actually Netanyahu stands a good chance of securing a majority because of the sheer level of uncertainty facing Israel right now?
So yeah, this...
If I ask you to be Mystic Meg for a moment, Joseph, that's
one of the things I've learned when it comes to Israeli politics is expect the unexpected. It is the only democracy in that region. They've had, I think, 4 or 5 elections in the last few years. Netanyahu was looking like he was on the way out. A conflict could make him look stronger or weaker depending on how the conflict goes. And so I wouldn't even hazard to guess whether this strengthens or weakens Netanyahu's chance of forming a coalition and becoming or retaining the status of Prime Minister of Israel, because it's early in the conflict and I genuinely no idea how the Israeli Republic are going to react to it.
Well, Joseph, if people want to find out more, if people have liked what you've had to say today, where can they actually, and they're probably thinking, right, I've heard all of this, I agree with this, I thought that was very level-headed, I want to actually find some impartial sources for what's going on in Israel, for what actually is what started the conflict, etc., etc. Where can people actually find some news that you would argue is actually worth consuming, I guess?
So the first thing I do, I plug my own content. So I'd head over to the Israel Advocacy Movement.
Absolutely.
We've got lots of explainer videos. Obviously, we're coming at it from a side which is sympathetic to the Israeli narrative, but we're also very sympathetic to the plight of the Palestinian people, and we're advocating for peace. Outside of that, I would recommend people go to as broad a spectrum as possible. Even if you like what I say, it's very important to listen to what's coming out of the other side. So one of the beautiful things with social media is that you can read the Palestinian newspaper Twitter feeds, and you can read what they're saying in their own words. You can watch the videos they're putting up of them attacking Israelis and screaming Allahu Akbar. And you can then go to the Israeli Twitter feeds and read what they're saying. So I'd go to Kutznet on the Palestinian side. It's very important to see what the Palestinians are actually saying rather than what the Western media is saying. And go to similarly go to the Jerusalem Post and other news outlets like that. But if you just want a very, very quick overview of the conflict, we've got lots of explainer videos on what's happened on the Israel Advocacy Movement. You can find us on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. And so, yeah, we'd appreciate any views, and we'd also appreciate any challenges. If you don't like what we're saying, if you have questions on what we're saying, drop us a comment and we'd happily respond and try and clarify what we believe or our narrative as to what's happening in the region.
Discussion and debate in 2021. What a novel idea that is, Joseph. Thank you very much for giving up your time today. I'll put a link in the description to the Israel Advocacy Movement, and people can check it out and give you some views. I imagine they'll have many. Cheers again. Now, if you enjoyed that, which I'm absolutely certain that you did, please do consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content. See you next time. Cheers. Reasoned relies upon grassroots donations from people like yourself that want us to continue producing our high quality, free thinking content. So please do consider clicking the link and donating, no matter how big, no matter how small, because it really does ensure that we can keep on keeping on.